Hi, Roseanne. How are you? It's so good to see you.
Woman, can you believe we're having this conversation?
I know.
Isn't it nuts?
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Like for so much of the coaching last year, I remember like I'd be driving my car and I'd be literally imagining this happening and like manifesting it. And I'd be imagining all the things I'd want to be saying to you.
Oh, well, let's dig in because look, this is your story. So why don't you start us off by sharing a little bit about who you are and how we met?
So, who am I? So, I live in London, born and bred in London. Well, actually, born in England and have been in London for like donkey's years. I am a former lawyer and I now run and I own a executive search firm. So I specialize in moving, like, basically headhunting, lawyers in the city. I started that when I was 4 months pregnant with my first son. So I have two children. That always sounds so surreal to say and really, really good. So I have two sons. One is 5 and the other is 15 weeks old. We were introduced through a friend. Well, she's now become a friend, but she was a sort of a business contact at the time, Suzanne Johnston, who you worked with. And I remember there was a point when, I just sort of thought I've absolutely hit a brick wall. And she sent me the podcast recording that she did with you. And I was sitting in the bath in the usual sort of pity party, Sunday evening shitness of thinking, I'm never going to have another child. I'm totally doomed. This is all a complete mess. There is nothing I haven't tried. Like, I'm really upset. My son's never going to have a sibling. And she sent me this podcast recording and I thought, okay, another one of these recordings, let me just listen. And it was like boom, 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 boom. Like it hit the spot. Every single word. It was just like, oh my God, that's what I think. Oh my God, that's what I do. Oh my God, that's what I've been trying to say. And I said, who is this woman? Can you tell me who she is? And she said, she's Roseanne. She's Roseanne Austin, and she was my fertility coach. And I was like, yeah, fertility coach. I mean, they're going to be like coaching us to wipe our ass soon. Like, forgive me for being really cynical. And I was just like, yeah, that's not going to be for me. And anyway, I thought, you know what, like there is nothing I have not tried, basically, from, and I know everybody sort of takes the piss when they come on here and they talk about the kind of vaginal steams and the combustion, whatever it's called, and the herbs and the supplements and everything. And I was there. So I thought, well, let me try this. And then you and I had a conversation and I thought, she's just way too American for me. And which is just an awful thing to think. And actually, I've learned not to be so judgmental through this process. Judgmental on myself and on, things that I don't necessarily always understand or that are new to me. And then you mentioned group coaching and I was like, oh, group coaching. I mean, that's just not, imagine talking about all this really intimate personal stuff with like random people I don't know, and we're not even in the same room. That would be a disaster. And so I was like, okay, yeah, let me think it through. And then actually, I don't know what it was, Roseanne, because in my head, I was like, I'm not doing it. It's not going to work. It's not for me. And something just made my heart go, do it. Click that link. You're going to be making a big mistake if you don't. You're going to have a big regret if you don't. And, to this day, I think it's one of the best things I have ever done for myself, And you often said, like in the coaching, that it's not just about, this process isn't just going to be about having a baby and staying pregnant, but it's going to be, you're going to change the way you do everything. And it's so true. And I mean, it just so happened that, when we were going through that process, I was in the midst of a massive home renovation. And, I think because of you, I kicked serious arse with project managers and builders, interior designers. I mean, there wasn't anybody that sort of didn't get the Roseanne in me. My husband would be like, what's happened to you? It's like the Roseanne effect, So yeah, so that's how we met. And then we did the group coaching. And then after that, I was like, I'm going to have serious withdrawal symptoms. I don't think I thought you were a bit of a crutch for me at the time. So I was like, I need to do the one-to-one coaching as well. I've just got to do it because I don't want to be alone. And actually we did the one-to-one coaching as well. But yeah, it was, to this day, it's something that I look back on actually so fondly.
Well, here's the thing. I like to look at it as a double blessing, that people come to the point where they are willing to reach out, to have space held for them, and to be seen and to be heard on this journey. But at the same time, it's a blessing for me because I get to meet women that I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I knew you on my own journey, right? Like there's a sisterhood it's a silent sisterhood amongst women like us, lovably type A, control freaky professionals. We get into this idea that I don't need help. I'm so capable in every other aspect of my life. Like, why the hell am I going to talk to somebody about this, especially about this, right? So it would be awesome if you just shared a little bit about like, what was the challenge that you were facing? Because at the time that you and I met, you were blessed with one son. And I find that fascinating because sometimes and I think that this is why your story is going to be so impactful, because there are some women out there for whom having a second child feels shameful. Like, I should be happy with what I have. Who am I to want more? So it would be great for you to wrap a taste on that.
I definitely had some of those feelings. I think secondary infertility is a real bitch. And, I think when people listen to this, they sort of think, well, actually, you're really lucky to already have a child. And, throughout your kind of fertility journey or secondary infertility journey, it's punctuated with those thoughts. But I think there is that shame, and it's really isolating because you don't really fit into the kind of I can't conceive club, and you don't fit into the kind of I've got a kid and I'm absolutely fine and I can conceive really easily club. And I remember actually, having feelings of, I think, not being able to conceive a second child was even more painful for me because it was so isolating, B, because I felt really guilty and unappreciative and ungrateful to share those feelings of sadness. And I felt a huge amount of guilt to my son as well, because I felt like, is he not enough for me? Is he not enough? Do I not love him enough? Am I not, am I one of these people that has that kind of sickness where they're just never content? They're just never happy with the card that they've been dealt. And it wasn't until actually you sort of taught me so much about things like, listening and not listening to the saboteurs in us. And, when things are going so well for us, we almost feel like actually we don't deserve anymore and we're undeserving of extra. And, I remember you saying that, I remember you saying once to me something along the lines of, I've got to truly believe that a blessing beyond measure is coming. And I remember thinking to myself, well, is that to suggest then that I don't think that my son is a blessing already? And actually, the way you got into my head and you unpicked all of that, it was to just see things from a completely different frequency, and to see things with a completely different lens and perspective. And I think for me, my journey was it was a really strange, tumultuous journey. So I'd had 2 ectopic pregnancies before conceiving my first child. I wasn't ever trying to conceive at the time. I was newly married, it wasn't on my agenda, fell pregnant, discovered it was an ectopic pregnancy. It was misdiagnosed initially. They thought it was a miscarriage. So I actually ended up having a ruptured fallopian tube, so had emergency surgery, lost my fallopian tube. It was all a bit of a mess, and then it sort of made me actually, because of that happening, it made me think, actually I think I really do want a child. And my husband was really keen at that point as well, because once we initially thought we were pregnant, we were excited about the idea, and then obviously started bleeding, was told it was a miscarriage, and thought, actually that would have been really great, even though we've only been married a few months. And then we didn't try. We just thought, actually, let my body heal. Let's see what happened. And then maybe 9 or 10 months later, I fell pregnant again. We weren't trying, but it was another ectopic pregnancy. I didn't know I was pregnant, had my period, a week later saw the bleeding. I was like, ding, I know the signs this time, you know, I'm not going to have it as a missed ectopic. And I remember going to the same hospital in London. It's a really, really well-known hospital in central London. I remember going and having a blood test to check my HCG levels. And the midwife, one of the nurses in the early pregnancy unit called me back, and she was like, don't worry, darling, it was, you know, basically sort of saying, it's all in your head, you're absolutely fine. I understand the trauma from the first ectopic has sort of stayed with you, and so it's making you super cautious. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, what an idiot, I've completely dramatized this and I'm wasting everybody's time. And actually, lo and behold, she gave me the wrong patient's blood test results. So kind of two quite big cock-ups from the same hospital in in less than 12 months, really. And it was only because I went back again and I was like, no, something's wrong. I've got a really sharp pain. I'm not feeling well. I'm bleeding a lot. Like there's something's wrong, and I want you to scan me and follow up. And they admitted me to hospital for 4 days. They had sort of like one of the leading consultants at the hospital, sort of who's kind of world renowned, looking after me, because I think they were so paranoid about it. And I wish at that time I'd learned, or I knew everything I'd learned from you about not being intimidated by these people in white coats, and truly understanding that they're not God, you know. And I think that was one of the really unique things about kind of the coaching, is that I was a bit cynical in the beginning, because I am, you know, I'm religious, I'm a practicing Muslim, and for me, I do hold a lot to fate, and I really have my faith in God. And so I sort of thought, you're not really going to understand where I'm coming from, but actually, you did, being a person of deep faith yourself, and actually you really taught me that kind of affirmation of faith. But B, the way you went about it, you know, that your GUS concept of God, universe, source, you know, whatever that might be for you, it was really eye-opening. And I wish at that time I could sort of remember, or I knew sort of how to manage these people who were managing me. Anyway, so it transpired that it was another ectopic pregnancy. It resolved itself. And I basically was like, I never want to get pregnant ever again. I'm going to do everything in my power not to. And then literally almost a year later to the day, I felt pregnant again. And my period was a few days late, and I thought, oh, actually, you know, what is this? And we just got back from holiday, and it was really hot. We just got back from Marrakesh, and I remember thinking, it was about 3 days later, I remember thinking, oh, it must be because the climate's changed, you know, it's all different. And that was when, you know, I found out I was pregnant with my son, and I didn't tell my husband until I was, I think, 8 weeks pregnant, because I was just so terrified. You know, that trauma stays with you. And actually, I think from there, it all just started to become a very, very traumatic, stressful, ugly situation where there was loads of unprocessed grief. I think that, you know, you also fall into this kind of mindset of victimhood. I think I began to sort of tap out. Actually, I didn't have a stressful pregnancy. It was a really uneventful pregnancy. It was absolutely fine. I was very healthy. Baby was very healthy. I had a really good labor, you know, a natural. For me, what was sort of part of my birth plan was a good, healthy vaginal delivery, all fine. And then when my son was 12 months old, I had another ectopic pregnancy. And I was like, fuck's sake, these things, they're haunting me. Like, what, you know, what is going on? I'm not, you know, why does this keep happening? And that really was, again, another blow, because I just seemed, well, actually, I'm fine. I've had another baby, and I've had a baby. I'm fine. My body can do it. I trust myself now. It's never going to happen again. And it did happen again. And then I then the year later had another miscarriage. It wasn't an ectopic this time, and the year after that I had a miscarriage. So effectively I sort of looked back and I was thinking, I've been pregnant every year of my life for like the last 7 years, and I've got, you know, one baby to show for it. What's going on? And you know, again, because I hadn't quite understood how to manage the process, manage the people involved with that process. You know, you talk all the time about your bump squad. I had no notion of that. I didn't understand how to, you know, how to configure that. You know, you'd listen to a lot of naysayers. There were lots of people who come at you with that toxic positivity of, well, it's okay, you've got a son, you know, be grateful for that. There's people out there that don't even have that, you know, and it's that settling mindset. You know, what I think I learned was that just you cannot settle. If that's not what you want, if your heart is calling at you for something, don't stop there. And I remember listening to that first episode that Suzanne and her husband were on, and I remember you saying, I think in one of the either the intro or the outro, this program is for women that want to be pregnant in the next 12 months. And I'd never heard anybody put it like that before. And I was like, boom, there you are, she's my girl. Like, she gets it. Like, that's exactly fucking it, you know. And I remember when I went to speak to a fertility doctor, he basically said exactly the same thing. He was like, looking at your results, etc., you know, you'll have a baby in 12 months. It's, you know, and it's knowing how to I think one of the really key things is, even though it's a really awful journey, and when you're in the trenches of infertility, like, it's so all consuming, and you know, like, it's so destructive. Like, it's destructive to you, to people around you, to your relationships, to, you know, it's really, really ugly, and it's also quite invisible. And you start to sort of almost see in yourself kind of personality traits that you've never had, you know, jealousy, envy. You know, someone announces a pregnancy, you want to be truly happy for them, and you genuinely are, but there's a part of you that's like, well, what about me? When's mine coming? And you know, when you taught me and you taught us all to stay in your own lane, you know, you can apply that to everything, you know. And it, you know, I don't use social media for that very reason. I'm not interested in what you're doing. I'm, you know, I am in my own lane, and this is, you know, this is about what I want to achieve. And I think you know, you really taught us to praise things that go wrong. And I think, even though, you know, when I, you know, that journey was a really, really hard journey, I wouldn't take it back. I would do it all again, you know, because it's changed who I am. And it's, you know, it's genuinely, it sounds really cliche, but you know, when I'm up with my baby at 3 a.m. and he wants to have a party, it's like, well, actually, I'm really tired and I've got a shitload to do in the morning, but I'm going to love this moment because it's what I worked so damn hard for, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and I think your story is so compelling because 3 ectopic pregnancy, I mean, like, most people would run in the other direction, and then miscarriages on top of that. Like, you had to be really clear in your heart at some point that you wanted this and that you were willing to become the woman that got it.
Exactly that. Yeah. And on top of that, actually, it was sort of, I would say, almost 20 months of trying to conceive and then nothing happening at all. And I'm like, okay, shit, like, have we turned a different corner now that's actually, you know, it's kind of layer upon layer of problems. And you know, I remember you saying so vividly, you know, be that woman, you know, be that woman that goes and gets hers. And, you know, I thought to myself, well, actually, all the things that make me successful in what I do and have reached the stage of life that I have, you know, I've got to draw upon all of those resources to get me through this challenge now. You know, and I listened to one of your podcasts recently and I remember using this all the time when I was in that sort of pity party of, you know, people on, you know, with very serious type A drug addictions conceive and deliver very healthy babies all of the time. And you said in one of your podcasts, you know, a crack addict, that's her challenge, but she can have a baby and she can carry a baby, but the drugs is her challenge. And it's so true. You know, I don't have a drug addiction, but my challenge was, you know, fertility or infertility or, you know, whatever you want to call it. And I think, again, it's about that kind of staying in your own lane. And then there's all of the fears and apprehensions of, okay, well, I'm going to start these investigations and all of these tests, and what if I'm just throwing good money after bad? And it's, you know, it's what you taught us about that lack and scarcity. I mean, like, that's mind-blowing. And I see it in so many people now. Like, I see it in so many people. And I think myself, coming from a background of, you know, sort of working class immigrant parents as a first generation, as a first generation individual, like, you see that lack and scarcity mindset, and it's really crippling. Like, it's, you know, and you know, when you talk about kind of your achievements and what you have or what you want or what you want to buy or what you've just bought, and, you know, before I'd be like, that's really crass, you know, don't talk about the fact that you just bought yourself a really nice handbag, that's showing off, you know. And actually, it depends how you pitch it, but it's not, you know, like, what you taught me and your thinking, like I remember thinking, when I have this baby, when I finally get pregnant and I have this second baby, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to buy myself the nicest piece of jewelry. I don't need no present for my husband. Like, I will go and get mine myself. I'll go and buy myself the nicest piece of jewelry. And if I thought, you know what, fuck that, I'm going to go and buy myself a car. I'm going to go and buy myself something that I really, really want, that I'll enjoy, that I'll put my children in, and I'll drive them around and I'll say, Mummy bought this, as her pat on the back for you guys. And I think that, that lack and scarcity mindset is so much, it's so prevalent in the kind of the infertility journey.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking. And that's why I hammer on it so much, because lack and scarcity obviously isn't just about money. It's about time. It's about opportunity. It's most tragically about love, right? And we get into this idea that there's only so many babies, and if I have one, I can't possibly have another, and all of these other things. And the real harm that we do to ourselves when it comes to lack and scarcity is completely silence truth. There is no lack. There is no scarcity. There's abundance all around. But when we get really siloed into that place where I don't want to throw good money after bad, it's like money is the one renewable resource that we have.
Yeah.
There's always more ways to make it. But you have to get out of that victim mentality, which is what you were zeroing in on. But what's compelling to me about this is you are the last person, right? Like, you are the last person who would have ever seen herself as carrying any victimhood around. I know it was true for me. If somebody told me I was acting victim-y, I would have been like, get out of here with that, because I'm no victim. But it's deeper than that. It's a mindset. So how was that for you to tackle that? Because there's no way anyone would see you on the street and for even a second think victim.
I had for years thought that infertility was, and I want to be really careful how I say this, because I remember when I was on, and I still am, on the journey, it could be really patronizing and obnoxious, and it could be really dismissing of people's opinions and feelings. But I have for years, always have and always will, believe that this is about mindset. And I've spoken to girlfriends about it, and they'll be like, fuck that, it's bullshit, it's not true, Somaya, because I've done the positive, the negative, the cautious, the cautiously optimistic. I've done every mindset there is, and it hasn't got me anywhere. And actually, I have to say, like, I never understood how to articulate it, but I knew it was all up here. Like, I knew, and I had, and you sit in front of doctors and you sort of say, look, actually, I think the way you're delivering that to me is not very good for my mindset. Like, I'm going to leave this meeting now, and I think it's going to really impact what I'm going to be able to do going forward. And they literally be like, well, no, it is what it is. And the way you unpicked things in my brain was just, it was just phenomenal. Like, I used to say to you on the coaching, because like, I just want to pick you up and keep you in my pocket and take you out every time I have a question or a fear or a concern. And during the coaching, I'd send you voice notes, and I'd just sort of wait there, waiting for you to come back, because I just knew those nuggets of wisdom would just carry me through. And it 100% was about mindset, because you're right, like, I'm not a victim, I'm an absolute doer. Like, if there is a problem, I'll find a solution, and I will use all of my resources to find the answer. But actually, in this situation, I could not appreciate that negative cognitive stew in my head was basically not enabling me to receive my baby. And you used to say that. You used to say, you have to get your head and yourself and your life in a place where you're ready to receive that baby. And, in your books and in the coaching, you talk about in your relationships and actually where you are on your life's journey. And if the only thing that you think is going to fix you is this baby, there ain't no baby that wants to come into that. Like, what an ugly environment. How much pressure are you putting on your baby in that scenario? And I look at him now and I think to myself, I can understand why years before you didn't want to come. I was obsessed with this. I couldn't appreciate everything else. I was just, if I could just have this second child. And actually it wasn't until, everything, I'd sort of got to a point where I was at peace with everything. And I was trusting in the process, and I truly, in my hearts of heart, believed he or she was coming. And I remember I woke up one morning, sort of 5 or 6 o'clock, and it sounds really voodoo, airy, fairy nonsense, but I was sort of thinking it'd be great if I had a little girl. And the reason why it would be great if I have a little girl, because I don't know if I'll ever be able to have another baby. So 2 might be my lot. And I thought, so if you have a girl, you kind of tick those boxes. It was a really silly way of thinking. And I remember one morning just waking up and thinking, I'm pregnant and it's a boy. And I felt him come to me last night. I remember vividly thinking to myself, he came to me last night. I received him last night. And I'm not talking, conception. I'm talking, that was when I felt, his presence. And I was pregnant at that point, and I was probably a few weeks pregnant, but I knew it. I knew it was a boy all along. And then we had our 20-week scan, and my husband was like, so what is it? What is it? And they were like, and I said, it's a boy. And they were like, she's right, it's a boy, and I think when that mindset changes, like, you just know. When you truly and authentically get to that place and you do the work, you just know. And I was absolutely religious about it. Like, I listened to every podcast, whether I was driving, walking home, doing my makeup. I did all the homework that you said, because I was like, if I really want this as much as I say I do, I'm going to give this everything I've got. And in the same way, I apply that energy to my professional life, my friendships, my relationships. I'm going to do it for this baby. And, I gave it hell to leather. And I think you once described me in a coaching call. He said, Somaya, you're coming to this like Elvis. You're doing everything that you need to be doing. What are you worrying about? But yeah, it truly was like life-changing.
Yeah, well, and when I remember you from the very first conversation, because I don't know if it's years in the courtroom that made me like solidify, like, I kind of make this mental visual, and I remember, when I think about the woman you were when we had that very first conversation to today, I mean, you were always badass, like, that's obvious, but there was a piece that came over you that was, it's stunning. It's this knowing, it's also putting yourself first, really, because I think that you finally made it okay for you to want what you wanted. And you dropped the judgment, as you had said at the very beginning. There were so many areas where you dropped the judgment, and now you're free. Now you're reaping the benefits of that.
Definitely. And I think it's also about, when you drop the judgment, to allow yourself to be a bit vulnerable and allow yourself to, as you used to describe it, kind of fall more into your feminine. And I think a lot of women who are, high achievers and sort of very kind of, tunnel vision focused, I'm going to target vision. This is what I want. This is what I'm going to get. And they get there. I think one of the problems with that, though, is that we don't know how to ask for help when we need it. And it's seen as a sign of weakness, when in fact, I now look upon, with retrospect, I look on that journey with immense gratitude, because I think actually it took enormous strength to come to a place in my journey where I thought, actually, enough's enough. I can't do this on my own anymore. It's not working. I need some help, and I need some support. And, I can't keep doing the same shit the same way, expecting different results. Like, nothing is going to change.
Right. And, it's fascinating that we as professionals, we would call in experts to do areas of expertise that we're unfamiliar with. Back when I was a prosecutor, I'd bring in a DNA consultant, I'd bring in, a jury consultant, all, these different resources that, were very specific areas of expertise. It's funny how we torment ourselves into not doing that here.
It's so true. And it's amazing as well how naive and ignorant we can be. And that I remember seeing my consultant for years, and actually another consultant, and it took me maybe 4 or 5 years. They're not even fucking fertility doctors. They're gynecologists and obstetricians who don't know. They can tell you how to stay safe and healthily pregnant and deliver your baby, but they don't really, in their case, they didn't really know anything specific about how to get pregnant. And also I think, it's learning how to navigate that journey with the right language and confidence as well. Because again, I can go into a pitch and be authentically confident and be pretty sure I'll seal the deal and I'll nail it. But I would go into these meetings and I would be really apprehensive about what they were going to tell me, and how I'd have to go along with what they say. And I remember, I must have had 3 or 4 coaching calls with you by that point. And I had a meeting with this new fertility doctor, and he said something, and I said, stop. This is all a red herring. The ectopics it's all a red herring. Like, we're going down, a rabbit hole that we shouldn't be going down. I want you to run these tests, and I want you to do X, Y, Z. And he said, this is someone who's one of the most infamous fertility doctors in London, and he's been doing it for maybe 40 years. He's pioneered loads of different types of treatments. And he said, yeah, you actually are thinking about it. You got a point. Let's do it. And, thank God I did, because it was those results which were, it was transformational in what happened thereafter. But it took me ages to do that. And I'd remember, I'd initially sort of challenged doctors, and I'd have my husband sort of being like, Somaya, you're being really rude. Don't be so confrontational. Why are you challenging them for? Why you're not a doctor? Who do you think you are? You've read a few articles and you've listened to a few podcasts. And actually, again, that's such an important thing, because you need to feel like, on the one hand, you sort of want to relinquish that control, don't you? You just want to get to that where you're like, I'm exasperated, I'm exhausted, I just need someone to help me now. And on the other hand, you still need to feel like, you're driving in the right direction, you're moving the journey in the right direction. And, you would often say you need gumption and you need guts. And
right.
It takes a huge amount of that.
Well, and it's interesting because your certainty is the one thing, that you can change everything. If you're the most certain person in the room, everyone else is going to take a listen, right? And this is what I tell women all the time. And I'm so glad you acted on it, because you have just as much of a chance of being right as they do, right? They know a little bit more about this, perhaps a lot more about this one thing, but they don't know you, and they don't know what's in your heart. They don't know your drive, and you weren't part of the study that was conducted decades ago about how this stuff works. So this is really where you gave yourself an edge by being willing. And it's not rude, man. Like, since when is speaking your mind and wanting? Because think about it, Somaya, what you're actually doing is trying to help him do his job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Since when is that rude, right? So, I mean, I think that's a stunning example of that. Now, I would be remiss if we did not talk about faith here, because as 2 women who are of deep faith, this can be a really significant challenge. This can be a challenge that throws some people off of it and gets, people to ask, well, why would God, universe, source do this to me? Right? How can I trust? Because think about it, Somaya, your faith is strong, woman. 3 ectopic pregnancies, miscarriages, 20 months without anything happening. It would have been real easy for you to get mad and drop your faith.
Definitely. I think then that's not really faith, is it? I mean, you can't just be faithful and manifest faith when things are going your way. And, I think, I truly believe God tests those that he loves, and I think with any relationship, whether that be metaphysical or not, I think there are challenges in every relationship we have, whether it be professional, friendships, personal, intimate, whatever it might be, relationships with ourselves. So I was fine with those challenges. And I know that God doesn't burden you with more than you can bear. And so I knew, I knew that, God made me a strong woman, and this was one of my challenges. And I was going to do my very best to navigate that challenge with grace and gratitude. And for me, it was not having regret. It was seeing the signs, the blessings, seeing the signs. And actually, again, it sounds a bit silly and a bit, mad, but even things like Suzanne Johnston having come, on my path and having introduced me to you, I believe all of that is, set up for you by whether you believe in the universe or God or whatever it might be. I remember just stumbling across Suzanne's profile on LinkedIn, and she was talking about her fertility journey, and I sent her a message and I just said, wow, you are the first professional woman in the legal field that I have ever seen speak about this publicly. Like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I ummed and ahed about sending that, and I just thought, fuck it, just send it. And I did. And, I'm so glad that I did. And I'm so glad that I asked her, for your details. And, because I thought, okay, I don't really want her to know that I need somebody. But actually, she showed me her vulnerability. I'll show her mine. And I think, God puts different people on our paths for a reason. You have to be able to see it. You have to know when there's a big risk of you living with regret. I would never want that. I look at some of my girlfriends who have, I think they would say by their own admission, given up or very close to giving up on their babies. And they are consumed with, resentment, anger, bitterness, stress. It's not what their authentic selves want. It's not what was in their heart. And I'm not judging them for that. Everybody's choices, they're entitled to make the choices that they want. But I just put my trust wholeheartedly in God, and I knew that it will come. I just have to help myself get there.
Right. I mean, I think that's so beautifully stated. And, it also underscores the fact that we know the truth. We know the truth. You knew the truth back then that you were going to have another baby deep down, but the fear and the ego gets in the way, like ego edging God out, right?
Mm-hmm.
We eliminate the magic because we don't know the next 75 steps. I mean, you could have, it would probably have been very difficult for you to predict exactly how your second son was going to come, but you knew somewhere that he was coming. And it's that kind of leap of faith that gets you to be consistent. Because think about it. You didn't just wake up one day and suddenly I'm at peace. No, you did the work. You were consistent. You asked questions. You showed up. You changed your behaviors. You changed some of the belief systems, especially about lack and scarcity. You deepened your faith. You did all of those things. And look at you today. He's 15 weeks.
And I think I was really, I tried to be really, really disciplined about it as well. And I say disciplined in that I try, I cut out gluten, I cut out meat, I cut out sugar, I ate as well as I could. I practiced mindfulness, I practiced, manifesting, I prayed my ass off. And with every, as a Muslim, I pray 5 times a day anyway, but I made sure with every prayer I did, I was really sort of, honest with what I want. Sometimes it'd be you can't keep for another year asking God for another baby, know when to give up. Maybe that's just not what he wants for you. And actually I was no, this is what I want. And, actually it's, I can ask him for whatever I want and whatever I need. He, he is the Almighty. He is, if anyone's going to give it to me, it's going to be God. And I think, with that, I learned to trust myself more, trust my body more, trust my thinking more, lean into the process a little bit more, trust that vulnerability was okay. Being more vulnerable actually brought out a really different side to my husband, in that he saw a different side to me. And, he was like, look, we'll do whatever we need to do. He came to every single appointment. He was there the whole way through. And actually, I think with my second, it was a slightly more eventful pregnancy in that I had quite a bit of bleeding in the beginning. And that was because I had a I can't even remember it for the life of me. I mean, they say baby brain, I mean, it's so real. I had a subchronic hematoma, which was just like a sack of blood in the uterus. When the placenta, attaches itself, it sort of does so with a little bit too much force. And I remember at about 6 weeks going to bed one night and thinking, actually, I'm just going to nip to the loo. And I went to the loo and I saw blood and I thought, fuck, I can't believe this has happened to me again, And I remember, and I messaged you, and I remember there was a really small part of my brain that sort of, that saboteur saying, God tricked you. Like, he actually tricked you. And then I thought, get that out of your head. Like, that is so blasphemous. That is so wrong. That is, and, thank God all was fine. But I remember thinking to myself, and driving to the clinic the next day to see my doctor and have a scan. I remember thinking to myself, this is not good. This is not where I want to be. And actually, I then bled throughout the pregnancy for probably the next sort of, I don't know, it was probably the next 10, 12 weeks. And at 16 weeks, I remember we were furniture shopping and I took my son to the toilet and I thought, and I just started to sort of, I started to see sort of the bleeding subside a little bit. And I started to lean into the pregnancy a bit more, because that's a whole other thing in itself. I mean, you get pregnant, you get yourself there. And then actually, because of the trauma and the fear, and because you have so much invested in this pregnancy, I mean, you're as mad as a box of frogs. Like, I mean, you've got your hormones, the fatigue, medicines you might be on. I mean, I was a different person, and it took so much energy to stay positive. It was really hard. And I remember you saying that to me, actually. It was really, really tough. And I think you've written a book about what to do on your pregnancy journey, and I bloody wish I had that and it was published during my pregnancy, because there were some really hard times, and there was lots of what you described as backsliding. I was backsliding all of the time, and I was really having to train my brain to be positive. And I remember at 16 weeks I took my son to the toilet, and we were shopping for cinema seating. I'll never forget it. And it was really exciting. It was all, we were designing this lovely cinema room and all of this nonsense. And I went to the toilet and I took my son, and I thought, I'll just go to the loo as well. And I went to the loo, and it was a really heavy bleed, and I was like, this is it. I knew it was all too good. I remember thinking, life just got too good, and you can never trust that it's going to stay good. Like, you have to always be prepared for that heartbreak and that disappointment. Who am I to think, I'm building this wonderful house with a beautiful cinema room, with my beautiful child, with my husband beside me and a baby in my tummy. And actually, really, what a fool I am. And that's the ego. That's me wanting to be right rather than trust, what was going to happen. And and there's this real, you used to talk about it a lot, there's this real trust versus hope. And how do you reconcile the two? And, we had to drop my son off at my mother-in-law's and go straight to the hospital. And I thought I was going to pass out. I was so, and I'm not a hypochondriac. I'm not, the sort of person that sees blood and faints. I'm pretty stoic like that, as I suspect most women listening to this podcast are. But I thought, I'm going to pass out. I just can't bear another heartbreak. I just cannot even begin to imagine how I'm going to cope with this. And I think this will be the thing that breaks me this time. This is going to be it. And I will never forget when she put that Doppler or whatever it is over my tummy, and she said, there's a heartbeat. He's absolutely fine. He's kicking around in there. He's as happy as Larry. And I just remember the sense of relief was just like complete euphoria. It was absolutely it was mind blowing. And from that point, and I think, and like if I'm speaking really honestly, I think all of that kind of trauma, it does stay with you, and it does stay, trapped in your body. And it's, it takes a lot of work. It's not just, an 8-week coaching course or reading a few books, or it's a lifelong thing that you've got to learn. And it was a hard pregnancy for that reason, but actually even, what you taught us, it even carried me through my birth. It was, I remember thinking, I'm going to deliver this baby, because in my first pregnancy, I had to deliver on my back. with my legs up in stirrups and, hypnobirthing and all of that, jazzy hippie shit just says you don't do that. And so I thought, well, with my second, I don't want to do that, and I wanted to deliver him standing up, and I did, and I sure as hell delivered him standing up, and it was all fine and all well. And, I remember seeing this baby and holding him, just thinking, I honestly thought I would never, ever, ever see you. And even now, I see my two children playing together or interacting together, and I see my eldest son, showing just so much love and warmth and gratitude for his little brother. And I just think I am infinitely grateful to God, and I am, I am just so indebted to God for these blessings. And that's it. And it's not just the blessing of the baby, it's the blessing of showing me how to get there. Yeah. And bringing people into my life that enabled me to facilitate that. It was, and, teaching me the patience, the tolerance, the gratitude, the vulnerability, all of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a stunning testimony on so many levels for so many reasons. I think your point is well taken that, it's one thing to get pregnant, but it's another to stay pregnant and also to have the mindset to take you through 40 weeks and a delivery. And you're absolutely right. We can be given the tools to get through that, but unless you're making the conscious decision daily to live that, it's not going to mean anything.
Completely. And, you always used to say hope is not a strategy. And for years, I just lived in hope. And it's a bit like kind of burying your head in the sand and hoping for the best. And it's really bizarre because I think the way we approach fertility is so different to the way we approach everything else as sort of, that, as you say, lovable type A. If I wanted to, achieve something professionally, I wouldn't rely on hope. I'd work my fucking arse off, and I'd think strategically and tactically, and I'd think, right, okay, what are the resources around me? How do I delegate? Who do I involve in this? How do I, leverage my network to get what I want to? And as you say, involve the experts. But when it came to my fertility journey, I was just literally living on, a prayer and hope. And it sounds like a contradiction to say I'm living on a prayer, but hope's not a strategy. But you can have faith, and you can absolutely believe that God will serve you as you hope, or will give, we serve God, and God, God will answer our prayers. Right. But at the same time, God teaches us to empower ourselves. We have a saying in Arabic, which is tie up your camel. If you're staying in an inn overnight, that's great, and you leave your camel outside, but don't just leave it to God to safeguard that. Tie him up and hope for the best, and leave the rest to God.
Right. Well, and I think you make another excellent point, is that we don't talk about hope in God. We talk about faith in God, right? That's a completely different thing. Hope is like 1 foot out the door, right? Faith is like, hey, you know what? I'm in this for the long haul. And I think that your story is just, more living proof of that. So what would you say? I mean, I always ask this question, and I think you're somebody that's seen this from so many different angles. What would you want the women listening to know? It's a few nuggets of Somaya wisdom that you would want them to chew on as they are embarking on this journey.
Well, I would say it was not Somaya wisdom. I'd say it's Roseanne wisdom, but me just absolutely mullering the eloquence of it. But I would say that you have to truly believe that trust is within you. And I vividly remember thinking that when somebody who told me about this clinic, a professional acquaintance, not Suzanne, she said to me, there's this doctor, and he's done a lot of work with women that have had ectopic pregnancies, and a lot of work with women who sort of have this unexplained infertility. Go check him out. And I made a note of it, and it took me 2.5 years to make an appointment to see him, which sounds completely crazy, bearing in mind that I would wake up in the morning thinking about the second baby, and I would go to bed every night thinking about this baby, and I would walk down the road and I would look for pregnant women, and I would look at women down the road pushing their buggies, and if they had another child or two, I would mentally in my head try to calculate the age gap And I'd be like, okay, I'm still okay, because that baby in the buggy must be maybe 1, and the baby in, beside her, that child must be maybe 3 or 4. So, I was totally consumed, yet it took me 2.5 years to go and see this doctor. And I remember the day I went to see this doctor for my news, I was waiting to find out what my HCG results were. I bumped into her in reception, and she had gone to see him for herself. And I just remember having so much trust in myself at that point, and trust in God, and trust in the journey and the plan. And I just remember thinking, it's all going to be fine. And people listening might think, well, it's all well and good for you to say it's all going to be fine because you've had your second child now, and that's a really easy thing to say. But truly, I think there is nothing like getting into your head and properly unpicking what is going on. You can take every supplement under the sun and have the most regimented of diets and be working with the experts of experts. But if you're not an expert in what's going on in your own head, and if you don't have someone to help you understand that and realize that, you're not going to make any progress on this journey. Like, it is, your body holds on to everything in the same way that they say, most cancers are lifestyle related, and recovery from them are, mindset related. That's not to say that, of course, medicine isn't a huge factor in all of that, but it's just like, there is a place for placebo effect in modern medicine, and in fertility, there is absolutely something to be said for what's going on in your brain. And if you don't properly realize that, it ain't happening.
Yeah. And here's the thing, you've got the street cred of having lived it. And it. And now that you're on the other side of it, it's incredible how much you can look and see how this was all working for you. And it's hard. Like, nobody likes to hear me say that. And it's like, oh, fuck yourself, Roseanne, you're on the other side and do all this stuff. But it's like, dude, if you just take one thing from all this, it's happening for you. It can be happening for you. And it's stunning to me. I mean, your story is just an incredible one, Somaya. And, one of my consistent ways that I look back and strengthen my faith all the time is I think about you, and I think about all the women that I serve. And I just think, man, each and every one of you is a miracle, in and of yourselves, because who you had to become, the chances that a lawyer in London would meet a former prosecutor, from California, like, what are the chances? But when you open your heart, as you have shared with us here, and you allow yourself to receive on multiple levels, these two disparate stories and these two seemingly unrelated things can come together to really call in miracles. So,
for sure.
So I'm honored to have been by your side, woman. And I know that so many women are going to be appreciative and blessed by this interview. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure. And I can't say enough, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Those sessions were truly beautiful. It sounds really cheesy, but actually I look back on them and I feel so nostalgic. They were, I was religious. I'm late for everything, Roseanne. And I was there at 1 minute to 4 UK time every single Saturday. Hell could freeze over and I would find a way of getting on that call, and it was just the most incredible thing. Just that resonance, that sense of community, that, not only did I learn so much from you, but I learned so much from you coaching those women, and so much from them sharing their thoughts and their feelings. And, I look now at my relationships with other women, and I think they're all the more richer and deeper for it. Like, my sense of respect for women has just, it's rocketed, and I think on this journey, like, you've got to really, really want it. if you're struggling, you've got to really, really, really want it, because it's going to be tough, and it may be long, and it's going to be hard. But when you truly want it, like, you will see the things that you didn't initially see. And that's what, sharing those experiences and you having lived it firsthand, your understanding. That's why it's always, you hit the right notes every single time, because you've walked that path.
Yeah. And it's incredible. You've seen so many of the women that were in the program with you. And then when they see you, everyone's going to shit twice. They're going to be like, ah! They're so pulling for you. Well, thank you again, woman. And what a blessing you are. It's just incredible to spend that time with you, and so many blessings to you, your boys, your husband. Go keep kicking ass.
Thanks, Roseanne.
Love this episode of the Fearlessly Fertile podcast? Subscribe now and leave an awesome review. Remember, the desire in your heart to be a mom is there because it was meant for you. When it comes to your dreams, keep saying hell yes.